Welcome back to the Empowering Minds Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and today we're diving into the powerful impact of the Rosenwald Fund Study on American history. It's a story worth telling, and I'm excited to unpack it with you. Today, we're going to focus on accountability, healing, and making sure that history does not repeat itself again. So I'm happy to welcome back a familiar face, Mrs. Helen Noel. Helen, originally from Elyria, Ohio, served in the United States Air Force and retired in 2009 as a Chief Master Sergeant. Thank you for your service. She's not just a veteran, she's an author, a powerhouse speaker, and a transformational consultant who helps people navigate trauma with honesty and compassion. It's always a pleasure to have you back, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to jump right into some questions. Can you give the listeners a brief recap of what the Rosenwald Fund Study is and your 13-year pursuit of justice?
Absolutely. Thank you once again, Jennifer, for having me. The Rosenwald Fund Study was the precursor to the Tuskegee and Guatemala studies conducted by the Public Health Service. In 1929, the Public Health Service asked Julius Rosenwald, who was at the time the owner of Sears and Roebuck, they asked him to jointly fund a project dealing with syphilis in the Black population in the American South. Rosenwald accepted, and the fund became known as the Rosenwald Fund Study. It involved tens of thousands of Blacks in the American South in 6 different states and numerous counties. Prior to the Rosenwald Fund Study actually being conducted, it was an epidemic shortly after World War I on venereal diseases worldwide. The United Nations, who at the time was the League of Nations, and they're the World Health Organization now, they decided that they wanted to conduct a worldwide investigation to try to standardize a treatment method. Prior to the standardization, the United States decided that they were going to select a group of African Americans to experiment on, pretty much. And they used heavy toxic metals. The heavy toxic metals that were actually being used during that time frame had an adverse health effect because they were actually studying women, children, all sexes, and all ages. And according to the Minamata Convention on Mercury, mercury has an adverse effect on future generations. So the use of those toxic heavy metals was actually being passed on congenitally from generation to generation.
So,
I've been pursuing a presidential apology and investigation for the Rosenwald Fund Study since I retired from the military in 2010, but to no avail.
wow. So, last time, or the first time you were on, we kind of focused on Pitt County. And I was really surprised at the bulk of information that you had because Pitt County is maybe 45 minutes from my home county of Wayne County. I had never heard about it in school or anything. And then, like I was sharing with you, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, I just so happened to look and I saw this cultural center. And I've been by this place multiple times. I said, let me go in there. I learned that day about the Rosenwald Fund Study and how it impacted Alamance County. And I'm talking like 12 minutes up the street from where I live now. Had no idea. And I had been passing by these structures, and I could tell they were like older schools. Had no idea. Those were Rosenwald schools right up the street from where I live. And then also in this cultural center, they had a lot about the Tuskegee experiment, the airmen. So it was just a really educational weekend for me. But it just amazes me how I really didn't hear of any of this until I was 47 years old. So thank you for
Absolutely.
your work and your study because you're educating people because I'm pretty sure it may have been other people who didn't know anything about the study either. So I thank you for your awareness around this.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So last year, you hosted your first annual Flower Girls Gala to educate and bring awareness to this medical atrocity. Now, are you hosting a gala this year? And if not, what are you currently working on to continue to educate the masses?
Last year, I actually hosted the first inaugural Flower Girls Gala to, like you said, to educate and bring awareness to this atrocity. I hosted it in Virginia. Reason being is because Virginia was one of the 6 states that was involved in this atrocity. This year, I was planning on hosting it in Georgia because Georgia was also a part of it. But because of everything that's going on with the current administration, a lot of the participants in the gala were actually were federal workers. So I put a pause on it for that reason because of the uncertainties in a lot of people's livelihoods right now. But instead of hosting the actual gala, I'm going to move forward with the fundraising campaign. And I'm planning to launch the campaign the same weekend that I was initially going to host a gala, which is the last weekend in April. So my intent for hosting the galas in the States was to host it in a more metropolis area where we would have a broader audience of people to attend so that we can educate more people, as
Mhm.
opposed to concentrating specifically on the counties that were involved in this atrocity. And because I had to put a pause on the annual gala in the state of Georgia, I'm going to move into the counties. And I'm in the process of establishing a think tank so that we can have community collaboratives. Because ultimately, as a result of everything that is going on today, the rural communities in the South are going to be hit the hardest when everything starts trickling down. So I thought that it would be a perfect time for us to move to the rural community collaboratives so that we can have a fundraising campaign and start giving back to those communities, considering that they have denied the apology and investigation for so long. And my father always told me that there is always more than one way to skin a cat. So we're going to concentrate more on the counties now as opposed to the state-specific galas.
Now, I'm going out on a limb when I ask you this question. I know that you have been studying, educating, researching for a formal apology from our government. Now, is that something that you are going to pursue even under our current administration?
That is a very loaded question.
It is.
And I'm not going to say that I won't,
Mhm.
because by me being a woman of great faith, I know that what the devil meant for bad, that God can always use it for good. So I'm not going to say no, but at this present time, I think that what I'm going to do, considering that the first collaborative is going to be in Tennessee, because Tennessee
Oh,
is where my family was from.
mhm.
And Tennessee is also the county that conducted the study on family units. So last year, when I implemented the gala, or stood up the gala per se, we also launched the movement for justice, the Family Love Matters movement for justice. So it makes more sense to concentrate on the state of Tennessee. I've already been in touch with someone in Tennessee who is in Tipton County, and they have a Rosenwald school as well that is a center. Now, mind you, when Rosenwald was contributing the seed money toward building these Rosenwald schools, there were over 5,000 and something schools built in the American South. And they even went as far as building several of them, I believe, in the North as well. So as a result of that, there is a lot of Rosenwald schools that are currently out there that they have turned into community centers.
Mhm.
So one school in particular is Fraser. It's a they turned it into a center. It used to be the Fraser School in Tennessee. And when I was talking to the point of contact, because when I establish these collaboratives, I'm going to be looking at contacting people within these communities and getting a small group of people to work with me as well. And as we raise the funds, we're going to channel those resources back into those communities. And when I was talking to this individual last week, he told me that Congressman Steve Cohen is very close. Him and Congressman Cohen have basically great rapport.
Hmm.
So I'm going to tackle it from that angle and see if maybe there's something that I can do where he can speak on my behalf. And that's pretty much what I need when it comes to things like this. We need a strong advocate,
Hmm.
someone who's not afraid to speak truth to power, so to speak. So I'm going to tap into that and see how he would recommend that I go back, to try to obtain the formal apology and investigation.
That's powerful. Well, you have a lot of support for whatever
Thank you.
whatever way you decide to maneuver. We always, will support you. Okay.
Thank you.
So now, is there a way to use restorative justice to make things right for communities harmed by studies like the Rosenwald Fund? What would it look like for these communities to get the real, meaningful reparations?
It's interesting that you say that because when it comes to restorative justice, they actually have, when it comes to these social injustices and these initiatives and the restorative piece, they have different areas. Like when I stood up the Family Love Matters movement for justice, it was actually a transitional justice portion of the restorative justice. And what that essentially means is when um, societies come together to be able to fight for justice for mass human rights violations. And that's why I called it the Family Love Matters Movement for Justice. It's a transitional justice because of the simple fact that it involved the masses. So I think that when you look at it from a standpoint of Tuskegee, for instance, with the Tuskegee study, when President Clinton apologized, there was grant money that was awarded because with the apology and investigation, there's grant funding that's attached to it. And they actually stood up a center on Tuskegee. And I think that that's kind of why I'm getting so much resistance because when you know that the government has committed a wrong, there's also reparation, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of monetary compensation, but there's some sort of compensation to remedy these actions. And because they are consistently denying it, I think that what it would actually look like would be in the form of building some centers and giving back to these communities, especially considering the health effects. When you're talking about the adverse health effects in future generations, when you go back and try to identify the actual families that was a part of this atrocity, and you look at the medical history and how pre-existing conditions may be passed on generationally as a result of that, when you speak of reparations, how do you put a monetary amount on death, so to speak? Because ultimately, it's shortening their lifespan. So for me, when it comes to these community collaboratives, because the relationship with Rosenwald was linked back to Booker T. Washington. So Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington were good friends. And as a result of that, Rosenwald gave seed money to Booker T. Washington when Booker T. Washington was the president of Tuskegee. Instead of Booker T. Washington spending all of the money at Tuskegee, he took some of the money because, mind you, you have to go all the way back to the early 1900s time frame when African Americans were attending schools in churches. The majority of their schools were church buildings. So Booker T. Washington asked Rosenwald if he could spend some of the money on in expanding the school and pretty much renovating the schoolhouse. Rosenwald accepted. And that's how this Rosenwald School Initiative even came about. And when Booker T. Washington died, Julius Rosenwald stood up the Rosenwald Fund Foundation, and he did it for the betterment of mankind. And he concentrated on three main areas: Black education, Black healthcare, and making healthcare available for average Americans. So, in keeping the same concept in mind, when we go out with these community collaboratives, we want to concentrate on Black education and Black healthcare, and possibly even making healthcare available for average Americans. But our two main focus is definitely going to be on Black education and Black healthcare, especially considering the fact that this current administration is tapping into Medicare, Medicaid, and looking into the dismantling of the Department of Education. So it makes sense for such a time as this for us to concentrate on those specific areas.
Again, I want to thank you for bringing awareness because this is a very critical conversation, especially considering the times that we are living in. And I know that, well, my opinion, I will say, true justice isn't about just apologies. It's about the actual action. And so I hope with your research and study that someone takes action to try to make this right. So again, I support your work and thank you for making awareness around this. Um,
Appreciate you.
Speaking of working, how are we working to heal the deep, lasting effects of studies like the Rosenwald Fund Study on families and communities, particularly when it comes to mental health and overall well-being?
Wow. I know that, like I said, I can only speak from the standpoint of the actual counterparts
Mhm,
to the Rosenwald Fund Study.
mhm,
And when you think about the Tuskegee study and the Guatemala study, like I said, when it comes to public health service conducted studies, the precedents have already been established where you receive the presidential apology and investigation. So, in looking at Tuskegee in particular, and the fact that they built this center, Tuskegee hosted a commemorative celebration every year. And they bring different individuals, they have different panels, they have tapped into a lot of the medical profession where they're actually offering different services. I know the families, now keep in mind with Tuskegee, it was only 400 and something families that were involved in this atrocity. So when you look at it from that standpoint versus thousands that were involved in the Rosenwald Fund Study, the families that were a part of this atrocity, they stood up a legacy fund where they actually get together on a regular basis, but a lot of the family members have passed away as well. So when it comes to the educational part, they tap into the mental health, to a small degree, but only because of the simple fact that the apology and investigation was already given, and they have built the bioethics center on Tuskegee University. I'm not sure how much more they are utilizing it as a result of that, but I do know that they have since added the Henrietta Lack story. So if you ever get an opportunity to go to Tuskegee University and visit the Bioethics Center, they have history on Henrietta Lacks and her family on one floor, and then they're talking about the Tuskegee study on another floor. So, like I said, they're tapping into that, and that's part of the reason why I have also stood up a support group to help people, because when it comes to medical atrocities and the fact that it involves families and it's being passed on congenitally, it causes trauma. Generational trauma. in Black families. And when you've been traumatized, and a lot of families don't even know about this atrocity, so they're not even aware of the mental health aspect involved in these deaths and illnesses, of family members associated with this atrocity. So I educate about the mental health side as well, as far as just trying to get people to come together and start talking, because a lot of it begins with the talking piece. And that's why I stood up my company, TalkStory, is to give people a forum where they can begin to talk. Because once you start talking about these atrocities and getting the monkey off your back, so to speak, then you can begin the healing process.
It makes me think too, with these studies and these different toxic metals and different things, I often wonder if that is linked to things maybe around like Alzheimer's and dementia. It, I mean, the more I'm like, this, yeah,
Hmm.
this is,
Absolutely.
I
Because think
can't
think
talk
about
some.
it. I'm sorry. Think about it when it comes to the lead poisoning in Flint, Michigan,
Mm-hmm,
and how, they did have that one doctor that came forth and she was very courageous in speaking out about it. But a lot of what is going to happen is the long-term effect.
mm-hmm,
Because if you begin to poison the minds of the children, so to speak, you know what I mean? And then you think of all of the developmental issues that they're probably going to have throughout, you know, their lifetime, so to speak. You know what I mean? So when you start young, and if they were actually experimenting on families, and then the state of Mississippi, they conducted a specialized study on pregnant women. So when you think about the effect that that has had on generations of families as a result of experimenting on pregnant women, that in and of itself speaks volumes. And that same county, it's so interesting to note, that same county in Mississippi that they experimented on the pregnant women during COVID, it had the highest rate of COVID-19 in the country, in that county. Now you tell me that that is not potentially linked.
so, um, I wanted to, oh, that was heavy. Wow. I was wondering, if you had any time for any questions, from, um, anyone listening in. If anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to, unmute your mic. Do you have time, Miss Helen,
I,
if anyone
I
has questions?
absolutely do. I'm
Okay,
absolutely fine. Yes, if
okay,
anyone wants to ask questions, I'm good.
okay, all right. Miss Bynum, Miss Langston, Sierra, um, Mr. Green, Mrs. Green. Just listening, Sierra. Okay. All right.
I'm very informed about this study, so everything Helen has said is spot on. So I have no questions at this time.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Anyone else?
And I've been participating. I was one of the first flower girls. So I've tried to participate in most of the podcasts. So I have a lot of answers to a lot of questions. Helen has did a great job informing us. Now, prior to her inviting me to be a flower girl and exposing me to it, I will admit I didn't know anything about it. Had never heard about this part of it.
Thank you.
Tuskegee was big, but this, nothing.
Mhm.
So I have to give you your props, Helen. You have done a great job informing a lot of people who had no idea of what was going on or what happened or what is continuing to happen with some of the people. Because, like you said, the long-term effects, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th generations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just an injustice in and of itself for, the government to be, you know, hiding this information, so to speak. You know what I mean? I mean, it doesn't make sense where you can justify the apology and investigation for the counterparts of the study, but not the actual one that, was the initial study involving tens and thousands of Blacks.
Because with the knowledge, at least it might give some people an idea of why they're having some of the issues that they're having and a way to help treat the issues. That's the key.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're accountable for what we know. And not knowing this information is, in and of itself, it's a crime on humanity.
All right. So, Miss Helen, as usual, this has been a powerful conversation. But before we wrap up today, do you have any final resonating thoughts or anything that's really um, resonated with you today that you would like to leave our listeners with? And I also wanted to ask you, because I'm gonna share this video on my platforms, but I wanted people, if you don't mind, to be able to connect with you so that they can learn more about the amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, I just want to, and like I said, be considering the fact that people just don't know, there aren't enough people to know about this atrocity. And first and foremost, I want to thank everyone that is online right now, because all of you are Flower Girls. And the reason why I stood up the actual Flower Girls Gala, it was a divinely inspired initiative where I asked 365 women if they would volunteer for a divinely inspired assignment. And the women who accepted became the Flower Girls. And it's approximately, I want to say I may be close to 370 now, because the garden is growing. It's not, the ones who were a part of the initial gala and had done the assignment prior to last year's gala is the original Flower Girls. But the garden is continually growing, so I'm still accepting more Flower Girls if people want to become more involved. But ultimately, with this community collaborative and launching this fundraising campaign, what I would really like people to do once I put this information on my website, www.talkstoryinc.com, I want people to contribute to the fundraising effort. And like I said, the think tank that we're going to be hosting in April, we're going to be actually coming up with a game plan as to how we're going to execute the collaborative. But I want to start, get as many people as possible involved in the fundraising campaign, because the more funds we raise, the more we can send out to all of these different communities that was involved in this atrocity. And even though I'm not getting the grant funding that I should be getting towards this initiative, because the current administration has also put a halt on a lot of these federal grants. But there's different ways in which we can assist the least of the least, so to speak. So all of the Flower Girls that are on this Zoom right now, as well as the other Flower Girls, I'm going to be updating them about the fundraising campaign. And even if it's not a monetary donation that people can make towards the campaign, they can send their treasure, so to speak, their talent, if you have a talent you want to offer. But essentially, once we figure out the needs of these communities, we're going to be channeling resources and packages, whatever we need to do to make sure that they're not left out, especially during all of the different challenges that we are facing with the current administration.
Okay. Well, whenever you get your flyer or your information, I'll be more than happy to share it on our platforms to encourage people to donate, because this is amazing work that you're doing. And I'll be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Okay. So again, thank you so much for coming on today. It's always good to see you, and to everyone who joined in. Thank you for being a part of our conversation today. All right. So until next time, make sure you stay informed, stay engaged, and keep empowering minds. Hope y'all have a blessed day.
All right, you too. God
Take
bless
care.
everyone. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.